Hi, I'm on. I thought family meant home, safety, love. Instead, on my 30th birthday, my parents handed me a packed bag and a silent goodbye. No thanks, no farewell, just cold words. You're too old to freeload. I paid their bills, covered their debts, kept the lights on, and somehow I was still thrown away. But the worst part wasn't being kicked out. It was seeing I'd been used for years and never noticed. And when I finally stood up for myself, they tried to crush me. Before we start, what time are you reading this and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear your story too, because some storms you don't just live through, you grow beyond them. I pulled into the cracked driveway, the sun already sinking below the skyline, casting our small town of Ridgeway, Ohio in deep blue. Dusk. The air had that first bite of fall where the cold sneaks under your coat and makes you curl inward. I reached across to grab the small cake box, the only thing I'd gotten myself today. $20, vanilla icing, happy birthday, written crookedly, in red because I didn't want to upset the tired teen behind the counter. As I stepped inside, the house felt wrong. Not that I expected a surprise party or even a simple card. I learned years ago that my parents, Cullen and Vera, had long stopped caring about my special days. But tonight, there was a heavy silence in the air, thicker than usual. The kitchen, lights hummed overhead, making everything look harsh and cold. Dinner sat ready on the table. Meatloaf, canned green beans, and boxed mashed potatoes. I hadn't even taken off my coat when Cullen barked from his seat at the head of the table. "You're late." I set the cake down softly on the counter, the bag crinkling louder than I wanted. "Worked late. Had to finish some reports," I said flatly, no sorry in my voice. Vera didn't speak, just played with her fork, never looking up. Cullen grunted, pouring more whiskey into his chipped glass. I hung my coat and sat down, feeling the tension spread across the room. Dinner began, knives scraping plates, glasses clinking, the odd forced cough. No happy birthday, no notice at all. Just the robotic rhythm of eating. I lifted my fork, pushing a sad clump of potatoes around. I should have seen something coming. Cullen wasn't one to stay quiet for long. Halfway through his plate, he slammed his fork down hard enough that Vera jumped. The sound shot up my spine. He leaned back, looking at me like I was something rotten. "You're too old to be freeloading." His voice was cold, planned. "It's time you left." For a moment, those words just hung in the air, unreal. I blinked at him, then looked at Vera, hoping for some sign this was just a drunk rant. She kept her eyes down, lips pressed so tight they looked bloodless. "I pay the internet bill," I said carefully. "The power, half the mortgage, groceries." My voice didn't rise or break, just facts laid out between us. Cullen laughed, a short, sharp bark that felt like a slap. "Paying a few bills doesn't buy you a forever stay, princess?" Princess, the name he used when I was little, climbing onto his lap with scraped knees and messy pigtails. Now it was twisted, used as a weapon. I swallowed whatever broke inside my chest. This wasn't sudden. It was planned. They had waited for today of all days to do this. My birthday wasn't a happy day. It was a deadline. I pushed my plate away. The meatloaf, the cake in the bag, the weight in the room, it all sat in my stomach like a rock. I stood up slowly, feeling their eyes follow me, maybe waiting for tears or begging or some sad show that would make their coldness seem right. Instead, I nodded once, sharp and final. "Got it," I said. Cullen smirked like he'd won some hidden game. Vera kept her head down, shame in her hunched shoulders, but not enough to make her speak, not enough to stop me from becoming throwaway. Walked toward the stairs, stopping briefly by the counter where the cake still sat. The plastic handle had stretched from the weight, pressing into the soft box. One candle was missing, probably fell out in the car, but it felt meaningful. One candle gone, one person gone, one family gone. I carried the cake upstairs without looking back. Each step creaked under my feet. Loud, blaming, final. I closed my bedroom door and leaned against it, letting the hollow sound echo in my chest. This house was never truly mine. Maybe it never had been. I sat on the bed for a long time, staring at the half-packed bags I'd been afraid to finish. Part of me had seen this coming. Maybe not today. Maybe not so cruel. But someday. I thought I had time. I thought I could fix things if I just kept helping. I took off my jacket, folded it neatly over the suitcase. My hands were steady, mechanical. Not because I wasn't hurt, but because I was done. As I moved around gathering a few things, my mind ticked through what to do next. Cancel autopay for the bills. Move my money to my own account, instead of the joint one my mother said I needed for emergencies. Find storage until I figured out the rest. They didn't just kick me out tonight. They gave up all I ever gave without asking for anything back. Outside my window, the wind picked up, shaking the last stubborn leaves from the maple trees along the street. Another sign winter was coming fast, and I wouldn't be here when it hit. As I zipped my suitcase, I caught myself in the mirror. Same brown hair in a loose bun, same tired green eyes. But something was different. A line had been crossed. A line I couldn't go back over even if I wanted to. I walked back to the bed, sitting down heavily. The cake sat on my nightstand now, looking sadly small. I hadn't even bought candles. Not that anyone would have been here to sing. The smell of cheap icing filled the room, sickly sweet. I stared at the box, the lonely smear of frosting visible through the plastic window. Then, without thinking, I pushed it off the nightstand. It fell with a soft thud, cake and cardboard folding against the worn carpet. Happy birthday, Ann. I sat on my bed's edge, the silence in my room pressing against me like a second skin. My suitcase was half packed, open wide as if making fun of my slow decision. Outside, the wind whispered against the old windows, rattling loose panes no one had ever fixed. The whole house seemed to sigh under its own ruin, and I suddenly saw it for what it truly was. Not a home, but a place where I had been allowed to stay until I wasn't useful anymore. My eyes drifted to the cake lying smashed on the carpet. Its ruined frosting looked silly now, a child's hope smeared across beige carpet fibers. I looked away and stared instead at the dull gray suitcase, its worn handle slick from years of use. It wasn't just clothes that weighed it down. It was years of covering their failures, fixing their broken parts while mine were left to rot. Memories rushed forward like a bitter wave. I remembered when Cullen cracked a tooth during one of his drinking sprees. He couldn't pay for the dentist, not with the late mortgage notices piling up on the kitchen counter. So I dipped into my savings, money I had quietly set aside for my own place, and paid cash. No thanks, no notice, just a grunt when he got back from the dentist, drooling and cursing the whole way. Or the winter Vera's tires were so worn they slid off the road. She called me panicking, stranded outside town. I skipped work, bought her a whole new set, and even paid for the tow. She patted my hand once, saying, "You're a good girl," before handing me the repair bill she expected me to cover too. When the roof started leaking last spring, it was me up on the ladder hammering shingles in pouring rain. Cullen sat inside with a beer, yelling about how you can't trust these workers nowadays, while his daughter, who he called a freeloader, saved the damn house from falling apart. None of it mattered. None of it earned me a place at their table. Tonight. I pressed my hands into my eyes until bursts of light flashed behind my eyelids. The sadness was still there, but colder now, hardening into something tougher to break. The floor creaked as I stood, grabbing my phone from the nightstand. My feet carried me downstairs, steps soft from habit. In the living room, the TV's glow painted my parents in an eerie blue light. Cullen lounged in his chair, beer in hand. Vera perched stiffly on the couch edge, eyes empty and far away. They looked fine, as if nothing had happened. As if tonight had been just another Wednesday where they ate food and acted like the world owed them something. I stood there waiting. Maybe part of me still hoped, still stupidly clung to the idea that Vera would look over and realize, that Cullen would sober up and remember who had kept their lights on when the checks bounced. But hope is dangerous, and tonight it was dead. Cullen noticed me first. His lip curled in a sneer as he raised his beer can lazily. "Don't forget to turn off the lights when you leave," he slurred. "You're not paying for them anymore." The words hit harder than any slap. They weren't just kicking me out. They were erasing every sacrifice, every unspoken debt. I didn't answer. I didn't scream or cry or beg. Instead, I let the silence swallow, the last piece of me that had ever needed their approval. I turned and climbed the stairs, each step slower than the last, the weight in my chest heavier than any suitcase. When I reached my room, I closed the door softly, pressing my palm against the wood as if sealing off the part of me that had once believed blood meant loyalty. For a long minute, I just stood there, breathing in the musty smell of old carpet and stale memories. Then with a steady hand, I pulled my laptop from under the bed and set it on the nightstand. If they thought they could throw me away and keep living off what I gave them, they were about to learn better. I opened the laptop, the screen lighting the room in a cold glow. My fingers moved quickly, automatically. Years of paying bills online had made the motions second nature. One by one I pulled up the accounts, electric, water, gas, all in my name. I hovered over the cancel button on the utilities website, my fingers shaking just once before pressing firmly. The electric bill, gone. The water bill, gone. The gas bill, gone. Each click felt like cutting an invisible cord that had tied me to this house where love was measured by usefulness and betrayal, wrapped in silence. Next came the bank account, the one my mother insisted we keep joint for emergencies. I moved my remaining money into a private account I had set up months ago, when a small voice inside warned this day would come. Transfer complete. The cable and internet accounts were next, services they used daily, mindlessly, never realizing. It was my name on the bills, my paychecks funding their TV marathons and endless scrolling. Cancel, cancel, cancel. Each click was taking back a small piece of power they thought I didn't have. I paused briefly over the car insurance, Cullen's, truck, Vera's beat-up Camry, both covered under my plan to save them a few $100s monthly. I could almost hear Vera's voice from last year, sweet and sticky. "You're so good with money, honey. It just makes sense." Sure it did. For them. I clicked remove vehicle on each one, heart beating hard in my chest, not with fear, but with a grim kind of satisfaction. When the last account was closed, I shut the laptop with a soft snap. The silence in the room felt different now, lighter, sharper. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about anger anymore. It was about balance. They wanted me gone? Fine. But they would finally feel what it meant to lose the daughter who had held their fragile little world together with invisible thread. Downstairs, the TV kept blaring, a sitcom laugh track echoing up the stairs. I wondered how long before the lights flickered out, before the heater gave its last gasp, before reality crept into their little bubble of self-importance. I wasn't staying to find out. Tomorrow I would be gone. But tonight I started, pulling the first bricks from the foundation they had so carelessly built on my back. The laptop screen dimmed slightly as I leaned back, my fingers hovering above the keyboard. It was nearly midnight, and the house had fallen into a false, peaceful silence. Below my window, The oak trees rustled quietly in the late autumn wind, carrying the brittle smell of dried leaves and the first whispers of the coming winter. For a moment I sat still, feeling the ache creep into my bones. I wasn't just tired from today. I was tired from years of carrying burdens that were never noticed. But being tired was a luxury I couldn't afford tonight. I cracked my knuckles softly, breathed out, and focused. First up was the electric bill. I had been the main account holder ever since Dad forgot to pay one winter and we went 2 days without heat. My password went easily into the login screen. Within seconds, I found the payment section, heart steady, mind clearer than it had been in years. Remove payment method. Confirmation flashed across the screen. I clicked submit without pause. Next was the water bill. Same story. I canceled the autopay, deleting my card info with a grim sort of satisfaction. I wasn't just leaving, I was cutting myself out cleanly, carefully from every vein that kept this household alive. Netflix was next. I almost laughed seeing the profile names, Dad's, Mom's, even one labeled Family Movie Night, a joke considering we hadn't had one in nearly a decade. Delete account, internet service, gone, cell phone plan add-ons, gone. My personal Amazon Prime account disconnected from the shared house address. Each click wasn't revenge, it was survival. It was truth showing through action. After an hour, I pushed the laptop aside and pulled out a yellow legal pad from the nightstand drawer. I wrote down everything I had disconnected, everything that would stop working once morning sun crawled across the siding of this crumbling house. I needed to see it in ink, the final count of everything they had taken for granted. As I wrote the last item, a wave of old unwanted memories washed over me. Late nights staying at work, 2 extra hours to get enough overtime to cover a surprise. Heating bill. The vacations I canceled so Vera could replace her car part. The birthdays I skipped celebrating because there was always something more important they needed from me. I held the pen tighter, forcing my hand to steady. This wasn't about punishing them. It was about refusing to be their safety net any longer. Scrolling through my bank app, I found the emergency savings account I had set up years ago. Back then, I naively thought it was wise. Something to make. Sure, our family never had to face another winter without heat or another summer without power. The account had my name first, but I'd made it open to them too because family. I tapped the option to freeze the account temporarily. No withdrawals, no transfers. It would take them weeks of paperwork and signatures to even start unfreezing it, and by then I would be long gone. As the confirmation screen blinked back at me, a tight knot in my chest finally began to loosen. I had given them everything: money, time, loyalty, chances. Tonight, for the first time, I chose myself. A new email notification popped up. Tyler, my cousin. He had sent a quick message. A cartoon dog sitting in a burning room saying, "This is fine." No words, just that. I laughed without humor. Tyler, for all his faults, always knew when something was wrong. I thought about replying but decided against it. I didn't want to drag him into this. He was family by blood, but he wasn't part of this decay. Some bridges needed to burn without witnesses. Instead, I opened a blank email draft, typing a subject line in robotic strokes. "You asked me to leave. Now so has my support." I stared at the blinking cursor. My fingers hovered over the send button, heart pounding once, twice, and then I closed the tab. They didn't deserve an explanation. They deserved the silence they had given me tonight. The clock on my laptop changed to 1:57 a.m. The house creaked and settled, and somewhere downstairs a bottle clinked against the sink. I imagined Vera sitting on the couch, holding her wine, glass, watching reruns like nothing was about to change. The heater clicked on, a deep mechanical groan rumbling through the floor. Probably the last warm night they would enjoy for a while. I double-checked every cancellation, every freeze, every disconnection set to start at sunrise. Neat, clean, final. By tomorrow, when Cullen flipped the light switch or tried to heat his coffee, there would be no power. When Vera went to pay for her morning groceries using the joint card, it would be declined. When the internet cut out mid-episode of whatever show she was watching, they would know. They would feel it. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I simply felt empty. But it was the kind of emptiness that promised something better would fill it someday. At 2 a.m., I closed the laptop with a soft click and leaned back in my chair, watching the shadows dance across my ceiling. My bag was ready, my car parked. 2 blocks away to avoid questions was already packed with basics. Tomorrow I would leave this town behind, this crumbling shell of duty and resentment. Tomorrow, they'd wake up to a life without the daughter they never thought twice about. Morning light barely crept through the cheap blinds of Nora's apartment when my phone buzzed angrily against the nightstand. Sleepy. I pulled the covers tighter, hoping it was a wrong number. But a glance at the screen broke that hope. 12 missed calls. Cullen, Vera, a few strange numbers, probably neighbors or distant family. I didn't listen to the voicemails right away. I just stared at the list, feeling a mixed knot of feelings tighten in my chest. A hint of guilt tried to surface. I pushed it down. They made their choice. Rolling onto my back, I checked Tyler's text first. It was blunt, straight to the point, like he always was. Internet's down, no lights. Dad's furious. Mom crying. I let the phone fall onto the bed beside me and stared at the cracked ceiling above. It had begun, and I wasn't there to fix it. Not this time. A notification chimed, this time a voicemail. Curiosity won, and I played it on speaker while pulling on a sweater. Vera's voice soft and shaking. Honey, there must be some mistake. You wouldn't just leave us like this. Please call me. We can fix whatever's wrong. We're family. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting those words hang in the stale air. Funny how quickly freeloader turned back into family when the Wi-Fi stopped working. Another ding. A text from Cullen. You'll regret turning your back on your family. No warmth there, no confusion, just anger. I silenced the phone. Turned. It faced down on the nightstand. Nora shuffled into the living room with 2 mugs of coffee, wearing an oversized hoodie and messy hair. She didn't say anything at first, just handed me one of the mugs and sat on the floor next to the bed. After a long sip, she said, You look like someone just told you your winning lottery ticket expired. I laughed without humor. They're panicking, I said simply. Nora leaned her head against the wall, knees pulled to her chest. Good, she said calmly. Sometimes it's not betrayal to save yourself. It's survival. We sat there for a while, listening to the faint sounds of a garbage truck rumbling down the street. Later that afternoon, I went with Nora to a community event at the local church. A simple autumn festival with pies and pumpkins and booths selling homemade candles. Small-town life in all its normal charm. I stayed near the edges, keeping to myself, but it didn't take long for whispers to reach my ears. Cullen was there. He stood near the apple-bobbing booth, voice raised just enough to gather attention. I didn't have to get close to hear him. My daughter abandoned us, he barked. After everything we sacrificed for her, kids these days, no. Loyalty, no gratitude. Heads turned. Some nodded with sympathy, but others exchanged doubtful glances. It wasn't the first time Cullen had aired dirty laundry in public, and people remembered things. Nora nudged me gently. Don't, she murmured. I hadn't realized I had started walking toward him. I stopped, forced myself to breathe. Let him rant. Let him play the victim. I didn't owe them an audience. Instead, I wandered past the booths, letting bits of conversations drift by. Didn't her daughter pay for their bills for years? Isn't that the one who stayed home to help when the mom got sick? Funny how now she's suddenly the villain. The tide was turning slowly, like an invisible current pulling away from my parents' control. Cullen and Vera could spin their stories, but real cracks were starting to show, and the town had a long memory. Later that evening, back at Nora's place, I scrolled through updates friends had texted me. Photos of the house, the porch light, out, uncollected newspapers piling up, a note that Cullen had gotten into a shouting match with the electric company rep in front of the neighbors. They weren't ashamed of how they treated me. They were only ashamed they couldn't hide it anymore. As the sun set over the familiar rooftops, casting long purple shadows across the empty streets, I stood by Nora's window and watched the town settle into the night. Somewhere not far from here, the house that once drained every drop of my patience and love faded into darkness. This time, I didn't rush back to save it. The house slipped into darkness, and so did a part of me. Yet, as the night stretched into morning, the world outside kept moving. People went to work. Dogs barked at the mailman. Kids laughed at the school bus stop. Life didn't stop just because mine had been cracked open. 3 days passed in a blur of trying to build a new normal. I buried myself in tasks, organizing the papers scattered on Nora's kitchen table, scrubbing down the bathroom we shared, fixing my resume for the 100th time. Anything to stay busy, anything to keep from thinking about them. But the mind is a stubborn thing. It was mid-morning when my phone buzzed again, that familiar vibration that sent my heart racing against my ribs. I almost didn't check it. Almost. The text was from Vera. After everything we did for you, this is how you repay us? Dad's health is failing. He hasn't eaten in 2 days. I stood in the center of the small living room, the phone heavy in my hand, my stomach twisting into hard knots. The guilt came fast and sharp, cutting into me like it had been waiting just below the surface. I sank onto the worn couch, reading the words again and again until they blurred. Images flashed unwanted. Birthday parties with homemade cakes, late night talks in the living room, laughter over burnt Thanksgiving turkeys. Childhood memories that didn't match the reality of recent years, but felt painfully real in this moment. What if they really were suffering? What if I was punishing them too harshly? The guilt slithered deeper as the day dragged on. It didn't stop with Vera's message. The calls started coming in. Distant relatives I barely spoke to suddenly felt entitled to an opinion. You know, your father's heart isn't strong, Aunt Marcy's voice croaked from one voicemail. Families fight, sure, but cutting them off like this, it's cruel. Think about your mother, Uncle Phil's text insisted. She's fragile. This could kill her. Each message hammered another crack into my resolve. Maybe I was heartless. Maybe I was the villain in this story. Maybe... My phone buzzed again. A text from Tyler. Short, brutal. Dad told Mom to fake chest pains next if guilt-tripping you doesn't work. I stared at the screen, the weight of that simple sentence knocking the air out of my lungs. So that was the plan. Not making up, not understanding, not taking responsibility. Just another con. They didn't miss me. They missed what I could do for them. Numb, I tossed the phone onto the coffee table and curled into myself on the couch. The sun moved across the floor, tracing slow, golden fingers across Nora's second-hand rug as the hours slipped by. I let the weight of everything press down, not fighting it this time. The years of bending over backward, the quiet sacrifices, the endless giving, hoping it would be enough to earn a seat at a table that was never truly mine. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was something colder, sharper. I didn't move until Nora came home from her shift at the clinic, her sneakers squeaking slightly on the hardwood. "You okay?" she asked, dropping her bag by the door. I nodded once, slowly, because I finally was. After she disappeared into the kitchen, I reached for my phone. I scrolled through my contacts one by one. Cullen, Vera, Aunt Marcy, Uncle Phil, every cousin and distant relation who had called to scold, but never once called to ask how I was doing. One by one, I hit delete. I didn't rush. I didn't cry. I simply erased. When I was done, I opened my settings and blocked every number tied to that house, that life, that false sense of belonging. It wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of mercy. For myself. I placed the phone face down on the table and sat back, breathing deeply for what felt like the first time in years. Tomorrow would come, and with it, new battles. I wasn't naive enough to think cutting them off would end the war. But tonight, I had won a small victory. When I put the phone down after blocking every number tied to them, I expected chaos to fall away from my life like a heavy coat shrugged from my shoulders. Instead, there was only an eerie quiet, as if the world itself were holding its breath. The first few days passed quietly. I filled my time helping Nora reorganize her apartment, applying for jobs in nearby towns, even cooking dinner for us. Small acts of claiming normal life back. I thought maybe, just maybe, I had outrun the damage they'd tried to leave in my heart. Then it started. It was a Thursday morning, just as the fall chill began creeping through the windows. I was sipping weak coffee from one of Nora's chipped mugs when my phone buzzed across the table. At first, I thought it was another job rejection. Instead, it was a message from Carrie, an old coworker. "Hey, you seen what your dad posted?" Curious, I tapped the link. There it was, splashed across the local town's Facebook group like an open wound. Cullen's words burned into my screen. Some daughters are raised to be grateful. Some turn into snakes. After everything we sacrificed, our daughter left us sick, starving, abandoned. Pray for us. The post already had over 100 comments. Some offered prayers. Others, people I barely knew, threw judgment like stones. "Ungrateful brat," one read. "Parents give you life and you spit on them." Another sneered. For a second, my hand shook so hard I almost dropped the phone. Nora glanced over from the kitchen counter, her eyebrows pulling together. Bad? I could only nod, pressing the phone screen to my chest, like it might stop the ache rising in me. By noon, the wildfire had spread. Screenshots flooded my inbox from friends who still cared enough to send warnings, neighbors, distant cousins, even former teachers commenting on how they'd always suspected something was wrong with that girl. Nora sat down across from me, fierce calm in her voice. "They're writing your story for you. Are you really going to let them?" I stared at her, the words sinking in deeper than I cared to admit. No, not this time. I powered off my phone and turned to the drawer where I'd been keeping the folder. My insurance. My truth. Inside was a carefully kept record. Years of receipts, screenshots, emails, bank statements. Proof of the thousands of dollars I'd funneled into that house. Into those people, without ever once asking for gratitude. They had forgotten the cost because they had never paid it, but I hadn't. I spent the next few hours scanning documents, organizing files. Every receipt was a memory, and every memory was a blade cutting away whatever pity I might have felt. By evening, I had built an arsenal, a neat, unbeatable fortress of evidence. Nora peeked into the room, her voice low. "You going to post it?" I looked up from the laptop, shaking my head. "Not yet," I said. "Let them talk a little more. Let them show everyone who they really are." Because I knew something Cullen and Vera hadn't counted on. I wasn't rushing into battle with blind anger. I wasn't swinging wildly like a wounded animal. I was patient now, strategic. The small town we lived in thrived on gossip, but it also crumbled fast when truth surfaced. All I had to do was wait, for the right crack in their facade, the moment when their lies grew too big to hold themselves up. And when that moment came, I wouldn't have to say much. Just the truth. That night, as Nora and I ate leftover spaghetti on the couch. She raised her fork toward me like a toast. "To survival," she said. I smiled faintly, lifting my own fork. "To never saying sorry for saving yourself." Later, lying awake in the quiet of the spare bedroom, I replayed Cullen's words in my head. Some daughters are raised to be grateful. He was right in a way. I had been grateful. Grateful even when they starved me emotionally, drained me financially, erased me as a person. But not anymore. By the time I drifted off to sleep, I wasn't just surviving their lies anymore. I was about to bury them with the truth they thought I'd never dare speak. The decision had been made. There was no turning back. I sat at the small dining table in Nora's apartment, laptop open, heart pounding in my chest, but hands steady. The air smelled of old coffee and rain from the night before. Normal smells clashing with the extraordinary. Moment about to unfold. Carefully, I uploaded the thread. It wasn't angry. It wasn't emotional. It was clinical. First, screenshots of my years of utility payments, power, water, internet, each bearing my name, each dated clearly. Then came the bank statements showing mortgage payments pulled monthly from my account, even when Cullen's paycheck had been enough to cover them. I included old emails between me and the landlord. Messages proving I had paid for repairs that had kept the house standing through harsh Ohio winters. Finally, I laid out a simple timeline. The years I gave up vacations, birthday celebrations, even basic self-care to keep a roof over their heads. And then the ending. A simple statement. When they asked me to leave, they didn't just lose a daughter. They lost the person who kept the lights on when they weren't looking. I hit post. For a moment, there was silence. Only the faint hum of the fridge broke the stillness. Then the phone began to buzz. It started slow. A few likes, some comments of shock, a few private messages from old school friends saying, "I always wondered why you stayed so long." Then the momentum shifted, like a dam breaking. Dozens of shares, hundreds of comments. Neighbors, former teachers, even people I barely remembered started chiming in. One neighbor posted, "I remember seeing her shoveling their driveway alone when she was 16, while her parents yelled from the porch." Another, "Cullen always bragged about how he never paid a cent for household bills once Anne got her job." Stories poured out like hidden wounds finally coming to light. It turned out people had seen more than they ever let on. They just hadn't spoken until someone dared to name the truth out loud. Meanwhile, Cullen and Vera panicked. First, Cullen tried to fight back. He posted an angry status. "We all have misunderstandings in families. My daughter exaggerates things." For sympathy. Sad, really. It backfired instantly. Underneath, commenters weren't buying it anymore. "Funny how you never posted about her paying your bills until now," someone wrote. "You don't look too sick cashing her checks," another added, brutal in its honesty. Then Vera tried a different approach. Pity. Voicemail after voicemail filled my inbox. "On, please. Your father isn't well. I didn't know he was going to post that. This is all a huge misunderstanding. Please take it down before people think badly of us." There was a time when that pleading tone would have broken me. Not anymore. I knew now it wasn't about regret. It was about reputation. That afternoon, Nora and I walked down to the fall festival at the town square. The crisp air smelled of caramel, apples, and hay. Children screamed happily from the bounce houses. The old brass band tuned up on the stage by the courthouse steps. I felt eyes on me the second I arrived. It wasn't hostility anymore. It was something softer, sadder, a kind of collective realization. I passed by Mrs. Langford, my old elementary teacher. She gave me a nod and a small sad smile. Mr. Collins from the hardware store tipped his cap silently. Finally, as Nora and I neared the pumpkin carving station, a woman I barely knew, one of Vera's old church friends, stepped forward. Her hand was gentle as she touched my shoulder. "You deserved better, sweetheart," she said quietly. "We all knew. We were just too afraid to say it." Tears stung the back of my eyes, but I blinked them away. I nodded, murmuring a soft "thank you" that seemed too small for the weight it carried. Standing there in the heart of the community, where I had once been invisible, I realized something with a clarity so sharp it almost hurt. The shame was never mine. It had been theirs all along. As the afternoon faded into evening, the square lit up with strings of fairy lights, and the smell of roasted corn filled the air. Children laughed, music played, and for once I didn't feel like an outsider, lurking at the edges. I belonged to myself now. Later that night, as fireworks exploded over the courthouse lawn in bursts of red and gold, I stood still, head tilted back, watching the sky tear itself open in color. A soft voice whispered inside me, "Sometimes the brightest displays come only after the darkest storms." And this time, I wasn't running from the wreckage. I was rising from it. The smell of burnt leaves drifted through the air as I leaned against the frame of Nora's apartment window, watching the small town settle into another cool autumn evening. Life outside looked untouched, unaware that mine was teetering on the edge of yet another fight. 2 days had passed since I posted the truth. I had almost let myself believe it was over, that maybe, just maybe, silence would be the final word between us. Then came the knock. It wasn't frantic or violent, just a polite, almost embarrassed tap against the door. I glanced at Nora, who peered over her coffee mug, eyebrow raised. Crossing the small living room, I opened the door to find a uniformed officer standing there, holding a large manila envelope. "Miss Anne Marin?" he asked, voice neutral. "Yes," I answered, a knot already forming in my stomach. He handed over the envelope. "You've been served. Civil suit. Any questions? The contacts are listed inside." I thanked him mechanically, closed the door with a soft click, and stared down at the envelope like it might bite. I didn't have to open it to know who it was from. Sitting down at the kitchen table, I slid my finger under the flap and unfolded the papers inside. Cullen had filed a lawsuit against me. The charges were laughable, if they hadn't been so cruel. Theft, elder abuse, financial abandonment. It was a tantrum, dressed up in legal language. Nora read over my shoulder, muttering, "Unbelievable. They're trying to destroy you, because you walked away." For a brief moment, that old familiar guilt flared hot and sharp, like a reopened wound. The same voice that had haunted me since childhood whispered, "Maybe you're making too much of this. Maybe you should have just stayed quiet." But that voice had lost its power. Instead of spiraling, I inhaled slowly, feeling the solid ground of truth beneath my feet. "Not this time," I said aloud, standing up. "I'm done apologizing for saving myself." By noon, I was on the phone with a legal aid office in Columbus. I explained everything methodically, calmly, forwarded them the proof I had already compiled. Every payment, every receipt, every documented act of support. They listened, asked careful questions, then assured me they would help draft a countersuit if needed. "You have a strong case," the paralegal said, "and honestly, it sounds like you should be the one suing for exploitation." I didn't want revenge. I wanted my life back. That afternoon, I took their advice and filed my own formal complaints, this time outlining years of financial manipulation under emotional pressure. Elder abuse, it turned out, went both ways. When adult children were forced into labor and money under the threat of guilt. The backlash was swift. Vera called first, her voice trembling with fake grief. "Anne, please, you're tearing this family apart. We only wanted what was best for you. You're overreacting. You know your father's not well." I didn't respond. An hour later, Cullen's text came in, a final poison dart. You think you won? Family always gets the last word. I stared at it for a long time, the words blurring slightly as anger and pity fought inside me. Then I opened the small drawer beside my bed. Tucked in the corner, wrapped carefully in tissue, was the tiny plastic cake topper I'd bought myself on my last birthday, the birthday they had turned into an eviction. A single candle, a broken memory. I turned it over in my hand, feeling how silly it was that so much hope had once been packed into such a small, meaningless object. Family isn't who you're born to, I whispered into the quiet room. It's who treats you like you matter. 2 days later, I found myself standing outside the police station, legal papers in my hand, flanked by a volunteer from the aid office. The building was gray and square, no more imposing than a post office, yet the weight of what it meant settled heavy on my shoulders. Inside, Cullen sat stiffly at a worn wooden table, Vera beside him, her hands twisting the strap of her purse. They looked smaller than I remembered, angrier, weaker. An officer calmly explained that if they pursued the false charges, they could be countersued for defamation and financial abuse, charges that could stick with the evidence I held. Cullen's face turned an alarming shade of red. He shoved his chair back, rattling it against the floor. "This is a witch hunt," he snapped at the officer. "She's manipulating everyone." No one responded. Vera crumbled into her seat, sobbing so loudly it echoed off the cinder block walls. I didn't flinch. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. As they stormed out, the officer turned to me and said quietly, "You did the right thing. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Outside, the sun was shockingly bright against the cool autumn sky. I stood there for a moment, letting the light soak into my skin, the courthouse looming behind me, the town stretching ahead. The air smelled crisp, alive, like endings and beginnings all tangled together. With every step away from that building, the weight I had carried for decades lifted a little more. No more explaining, no more guilt, no more apologies. As I crossed the parking lot, a gust of wind picked up fallen leaves and sent them swirling around my boots. It was as if the world itself was brushing away the last bits of a life that no longer belonged to me. The courthouse grew smaller in my rearview mirror as I pulled onto the main road, windows down, letting the crisp fall air wash through the car like a baptism. For the first time in longer than I cared to admit, my heart didn't feel like it was dragging a boulder behind it. No phone vibrating with guilt-filled voicemails, no texts demanding apologies I didn't owe, no more tearing myself apart trying to stitch together a family that had never really included me. I was free, but freedom, I realized, was quieter than I expected. I spent the next few days at Nora's apartment, moving through the small routines of life, making coffee, folding laundry, walking to the corner store for milk, ordinary things done without looking over my shoulder, without waiting for someone to bark an order, toss a bill my way, or remind me that I owed them for existing. It felt foreign and precious. One morning, sitting at the tiny kitchen table with my laptop open, I stumbled across an ad for a small rental unit downtown. Nothing fancy. An aging brick building with creaky floors and drafty windows. But it was mine if I wanted it. And for once, I did. By noon, I'd signed the lease. I didn't tell anyone except Nora. She smiled, handing me a chipped coffee mug to toast with. "To new beginnings," she said simply. "To finally choosing myself," I added. The next weeks blurred into a soft golden rhythm. I bought secondhand furniture piece by piece. A couch with sun-faded cushions, a wobbly kitchen table someone had loved before me. I painted the walls pale blue, the color of open skies and deep breaths. At night I would sit by the single living room window, watching the town lights blink on and off like distant stars. And somewhere between one breath and the next, I realized the silence no longer felt empty. It felt earned. One Saturday, while unpacking a final box, I found it tucked away at the bottom, a relic from another life. The tiny plastic cake topper, the one from the birthday that had ended everything. I held it in my palm for a long while, the late afternoon sun glinting off its cheap bent edge. It didn't hurt to look at it anymore. It didn't feel like a reminder of what I lost. It felt like proof of what I survived. I placed it on a shelf above my desk. A small private trophy, not to honor the people who hurt me, but to honor the girl who didn't let it destroy her. Sometime later, a card slipped under my door. No return address. Inside, a short note in careful handwriting. You were never the problem. Some people just fear the ones they can't control. I never found out who sent it. I didn't need to, because I already knew the truth. The final truth. Family isn't something you earn by sacrifice. It's something you're given freely, or not at all. And in their absence, I was building something they could never take from me. Peace, self-respect, a life stitched together not from duty, but from choice. As I sat by my window that night, city lights glowing softly below, I smiled to myself and whispered the words I had waited my whole life to believe. I am enough. Sometimes walking away from the people who raised you is the only way to become the person you were meant to be. Blood may tie us together, but respect, trust, and kindness are what make a true family. Have you ever faced a moment where choosing yourself meant losing everything you thought you needed? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. If you found a piece of yourself in this story, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful journeys like this, because here, every story matters. Stay strong, stay true. Family drama doesn't define you. How you rise from it does.